Now let's take a look at taking what we just built there with those pivot tables and visualizing them in what are known as pivot charts. So the difference between a pivot chart and a regular chart is that the pivot chart is based on a pivot table. And with a pivot table, as you can see on the right, I can sort, filter, and I can do all these kind of things and interact with it. And that'll update the chart as well. Whereas if I just had a regular data set, I'd have to set up a bunch of different things in order to be able to have that same functionality. So what we want to do in this case, if we want to make it interactive and be able to answer lots of questions for somebody instead of just a single question with our data, then we'd want to make it more interactive. So it's real simple. I can click on my pivot table here, and with it selected, I can say Insert Pivot Chart. And for this one, it's real simple. I'm going to do an area chart over time, looking like that. Looks pretty good to me. And I can see what that looks like. We'll go ahead and click on the style here. I want the dark one. I have some different options there. And with that, I can color it differently. I can choose like a color palette. The ones I kind of like are this orange, so we'll leave it like that. Probably want to give it a title. It's generally good to do that. Wage margin by month. You can see when I click on this, I have the pivot table fields, which I can still interact with, and I also have the ability to format the chart title. So I have this fill, gradients, all this kind of stuff. I can put a border around it if I wanted to, something like that, just for the sake of demoing it. And then I can format my axes, I can change the types of dates I see, I can do all this kind of stuff here. I'm not going to get too deep into this. The basic idea is that once you have something there, you can actually just easily visualize it in something that is just a bit easier to understand what's going on. Now let's go over to our days complete pivot, see what kind of visualization we can come up with here. This one I'm going to do a combo chart. So I'm going to go up to my insert again and pivot chart. And there's a combo option down on the bottom. And you can kind of preview and see what that's like. It's real nice how it just does it for you. You can change the different type and all that just by clicking a couple buttons. And that's what I'm going to leave this one as. Kind of good. And I kind of like this visualization, you know, because it shows you the average days complete. And then it shows you how many they've done. So it's a really interesting thing, where looking at Bob Turner here, you know, his days complete are a bit higher, but his number of rows, so the number of projects he's completed, really isn't much different than, say, Alan Young over to the left there. So something's going on here, something interesting. The data is certainly much easier to consume this way than over to the chart on the left. I certainly wouldn't be able to understand the variance here versus that. So one thing I may want to do is edit this axis. Since it doesn't start at 0, it's not always telling the true story. So it may look like Frank here he's at 1.95, and that looks like about as half as the time as Bob Turner. But we can see that Bob is merely at 2.09. So it's really, we're talking about not much of a difference between these two, but because this axis doesn't start at 0, it really kind of skews the truth. It makes it look unrealistic. So this is where you may want to format the axes and dive deeper and make sure that the data is being represented exactly how it should be. So to do that, I just right-clicked on the axes, and then I can change it from a minimum of that to 0, tab out, and you can see how it updated. See, now it's much more of a true representation of the data. And in other courses out there, I have a couple and a few others do, we talk a lot about just the idea of visualizing data and how the default settings may not be exactly what you want. You know, it probably would make sense to on the right side as well, change this axis so I have 1,000 separators, or I just have 2.5K, 3K, that kind of a abbreviation. You want to basically remove any chart junk, as it's known, to where things that really aren't necessary aren't there, because you want the data to shine through. You don't want to be distracted by all this other chart junk, I guess is the best way to put it. Okay, now let's take a look at our sales pivot. And here we're going to do a bar chart. So I'm going to do insert, and I'm going to choose pivot chart. And I'm going to do not a column chart, but an actual bar chart. In other tools, these are both known as bar charts. One would just be horizontal versus vertical. But in Excel's world, we call this one a column versus a bar. So I'm going to click OK. It gives me this nice bar chart. Pretty much exactly what I wanted right out of the gate. Get rid of my format options. Get rid of my pivot table fields. Just jump over here so I can see what that looks like. Looking pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to sort this. So if I go to sort my sector here, I'm going to sort descending, not like that, but with the more sort options. And I'm going to sort descending by sum of sales amount. And you can see what it did there. It's interesting how these are kind of opposites. So usually what I'd want to do here is I'd want to choose the A to Z and then do the more sort options. So I can do an ascending on sum of sales amount. So it gives me kind of the top to the bottom on the right side here. We know that this is total, or we know that this is sale amount, so I'll go ahead and delete that. I'll give it a title here, sales by sector. And I'll format my axes a little bit so that way I don't really need to see all those zeros there. We're talking in millions here, so I should be able to do something like that. There you go. So that kind of makes it a bit cleaner. There we go. Looking pretty good.